Well, welcome everybody to week 3 of our February online program for the alumni of the Sunshine Coast Health Center up here in Powell River, BC. And this month, February, we've been talking about some ideas from Dr. Thomas Greening, a psychologist in California. So we've looked at he says each of us, every single human being, is faced with at least 4 fundamental issues they have to deal with in their life. So on week 1, we talked about how do you live knowing for a fact that you're going to die. Death is a big thing for humans. All humans are aware of death, the only species that is, as far as we know. Second point that Dr. Greening makes, which we dealt with in week 2, which is how do you make sense of the world? Some people latch on to things for dear life. I know people who read the astrology columns in the newspapers, and they literally run their lives around this. Week 3, this week's online program, we'll talk about another interesting one, and that is to figure out how much freedom of choice do we have, and how much of our choice is actually determined. And when you start thinking about this gets kind of interesting, because I always think I have freedom of choice, right? I get to choose this, that, and the other thing. But when I really start thinking about it, I'm not so sure. For example, ever since I was little, I wanted to play in the NHL. But after I got to first year junior hockey, it became extremely obvious to me that that was never going to happen. For whatever reason, I just didn't have the ability. Or maybe I'm going to go drive my car at 100 miles an hour. Well, I drive this piece of junk car that barely makes it to, sometimes I'm amazed it even starts, but it definitely would never go 100 miles an hour. So I'm limited by my car. Of course, I could go out and buy a really fancy deluxe car with a big engine and no problem at all driving 100 miles an hour. But then, basically, would I want to do that? My son at college would have to stop asking me for money, I think, if that's a possibility. But we're limited by biology, by financial constraints, by level of our intelligence, by our families, by where we live. All sorts of things actually limit us. Even now, some research has come out a few years back which made the argument that human beings don't even have the free will to grab a coffee cup. Apparently, according to this research, unconsciously we reach for a coffee cup, and then 1/2 second later we become aware of what we're doing. So the argument from that side is that these little basic things we do, we don't even have the free will to do that. And a very famous psychologist at Harvard University took that experiment and actually proposed that free will, this belief that we have choice, is a total illusion. I don't personally buy into that, but that's an argument made, and he's got a lot more letters after his name than I do. But anyway, the idea is from Dr. Greening that all of us have to make this decision. So some people sort of assume they have no limitations and they make decisions all the time, and that's all they do, whether or not their neighbors like it or their spouse likes it or family or anything else. That's what I'm going to do. This is very, very common now, apparently, in dating, right? Where I'm going to dump someone if that person is preventing me from exercising my free will and being true to myself. Right? Kind of a sad thing, but it seems to be pretty common nowadays. So some people just pretend that there are no limitations. Other people think that their lives are totally determined. A lot of the clients at Sunshine Coast, if you remember back here, everything about them seemed to be dictated by external things. I suffer because of my parents are doing this to me, and if they would just back off, then I'd be fine. Or, I don't know what the heck Harry's doing here. I mean, he's obviously not serious about recovery. He's ruining everybody's recovery, and we'd all be a lot better off if Harry weren't here. Right? It's like they actively refuse to take control of their lives, to be the author of their lives. Okay? And a third response, according to Dr. Greening, to this issue of free will and determinism is, and the one that he would argue is the healthy response, is a recognition that although I am the author of my life, at the same time, I recognize I have limitations, and I'm perfectly able to operate in the world knowing all of that. So I'm not going to be blaming everything in his dog because of my suffering. And on the other hand, I'm not going to run roughshod through the world just doing whatever I feel like doing and the hell with everyone else. But a recognition that maybe it's both, right? So I have free will, I get to choose what I do, but also a realistic recognition that I can't do anything that I want to do, right? I may want a lot of money and get the brilliant idea I'll rob a bank, but there are consequences to that. I'll get arrested and thrown in jail. So I guess I get a choice to make there, right? This, if you remember, is one of the things we've talked about before from Viktor Frankl, right? The whole concept of, what does life demand of you? Like, you don't get to do anything that you feel like doing, right? You are surrounded by other people, by your biology, by the fact that you live in a Western democracy. All of these have certain limitations they put on you. Still, knowing all that, how do I get to be true to myself? How do I get to make decisions that will allow me to flourish and thrive in the world? So again, these are things you can think about for yourself. How do you respond to this whole free will and determinism? Do you believe that you are capable of being the author of your life, even though you know you have all of these limitations? Right? Or have you succumbed to believing that you have no free will whatsoever and everything is just acting against you, maybe including God? Or do you run roughshod over people? You're just going to do whatever the hell you're going to do regardless of anything. How do you approach this, right? So this is a fundamental question to ask yourself. Anyway, that's this edition of the online program, and we'll be back next week with the last of Dr. Greening's ideas.